A lot of this channel has been updating people's understanding of how the world order is evolving, and it has been the case that the world came through the end of the Cold War, the post-Cold War phase, in which the US was the only superpower. Then the problem of terrorism, the war on terror, while the simultaneous rise of China raised questions and suspicions and internet rumors and far-right rhetoric in the West about a connection between the Middle East, Russia and China. And there was indeed a link with Iran. But despite the revolutionary Iran's involvement in the Arab Spring, which incited Shia minorities in Sunni majority countries to rise up and revolt against them, overthrowing governments across the Middle East, the actual jihadists were more on the conservative side, wanting to force foreign influence out of the Middle East. And that's why their biggest target became the World Trade Center in New York on 2001. So hence they were the smaller of the two political movements in the Middle East, the revolutionary side being the larger one, which had been dominated by ultra-conservative Saudi Arabia, where the Prophet Muhammad, founder of Islam, was born and created the origins of all the Islamic nations. So we can see the conservative side there wanting to keep the Middle East ultra-conservative, while the left-wing revolutionary side is seeking to change the fundamental circumstances in the Middle East so that it leans towards a more people perspective. So in response, the West became preoccupied with its need to perpetuate its idea of progress, owing to the way that the two sides of East and West worked in their own way, and even saw a rise in traditional Christian values and far-right political organizations in response to the chaos which ensued as people in the West kind of didn't really understand the situation at all that was going on in the Eastern side. So one of these organizations even called itself the Organization and was designed to help right-wing governments into power in the West. Henceforth, with the problem of terrorism receding due to the multipolar environment, government protocols requiring global security to prevent another 9/11. And then it became a case of having to renegotiate the East-West relationship due to China becoming the top communist state. The new big issue moved to North Korea on the eastern side, developing nuclear weapons as their gambit, involving China, who then said that if they actually engaged in conflict with the United States, then they would not support them, and they cut them loose. So in this way, they managed to kind of shift the geopolitical weight of where the importance of the way that events were happening, and hence we can see this phase kind of diminish, and eventually then the new problem with the Ukraine war crisis emerging out of that phase, because once again our inability to create change in an intelligent way. So what else can we say about the world heading into the multipolar environment? We can see that during the Cold War, the Security Council at the UN played the most important role in terms of resolving issues between the superpowers, and we could even say that it prevented World War III. But then after that, when the problem of terrorism and war on terror erupted, hence it was very much pushed into the background along with Russia, mainly due to the fact that the US and its allies wanted to handle the situation single-handedly, even though Russia and the US worked together against Islamic State jihadists in the years that followed, while the G8 and G20 summits were pushed towards the forefront of politics by the UN to emphasize the importance of democracy. So now we have Russia acting autonomously in the invasion of Ukraine, and the US influence having Russia acting, being pushed into the background. So is this the way the BRICS alliance has counterbalanced Western influence over time, using the way both US influence and NATO expanded through the war on terror period? So now the war in Ukraine has led to the exclusion of Russia in various ways, from attending international sporting events to the G8 summits. So we can predict more problems in the future, even though Trump has sided with Russia to end the Ukraine war. there are big questions not only about how the world is progressing, but also the consistency in the world system in terms of the conventions governing the way things are done. So that's both in terms of everyday life and on a higher geopolitical level. And the sets of alliances which emerge as the situation develops. In general terms, it seems that the more a synthesis of East and West occurs, the more free play there is in terms of the two sides being able to choose whether to cooperate or not. Whereas the more they're polarized, the more difficult it is for them to even communicate. Yet too much cooperation, and it seems to corrupt the agendas on both sides, drawing them into a future conflict. So not only this, the kind of national karma, as it were, which must express itself on the national level during the multipolar phase, for issues within the nation to be addressed. And so the focus is on governments looking to the workers to create goods and services which enable societies to function, so they can measure the progress which occurs and look for ways to improve. So that means progress in terms of creating technology, logistics, infrastructure, and other things which move the situation forward in real terms. And through this, we can see the weight of the issue has even now completely shifted from capitalism, communism divide to the question over the relationship really between the administration and the citizenship in each nation. Whereas the structure then of the UN framework of nations adds up in a kind of broader mathematical sense, so we can see what's going on more clearly on an overview level rather than the kind of cloud we had over things during the Cold War when it wasn't really clear how the world had evolved out of history and what the problems of it were. But I think since the end of the Cold War, then the problem of terrorism, then there's been a hell of a lot more analysis about how the situation is working globally, which governments have been updated on. And this is reflected in the increased organisation ability on a national level now. So the question really now is over the ability of nations to create progress for themselves. And through this, we can see into what's really happening in the multipolar environment. So if we consider that in a broad sense, various nations are joining both sides of NATO and BRICS, this can be regarded as the resolution to the problem of the fundamental difference in the agendas of East and West. And so we may see this as a positive part of the situation as the world comes through the problem of the Ukraine war being representative of the overall point the world is at in terms of geopolitics, while the Israel-Hamas conflict could be regarded as the negative side, as it's a spin-off war which has been brought to a new level by the games which the superpowers have been playing between themselves. And thus we can see we are one step closer to the issue of reform to the Security Council, because we can see the US, France and UK supporting the issue of Ukraine and Israel, while Russia and Iran support Hamas. So we've got an overt and a covert aspect to the situation, but we can see it moving forward over time. And meanwhile, China is really acting as an anchor for world peace in the background. But the big question is now, what will happen to these roles as China goes for Taiwan?